Hello, everyone, and good evening. I am your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. If you are new to the channel, please hit like, subscribe, and don't forget to hit that notification bell as we're adding new shows and cross streams constantly. And don't forget, June 26th, we are going to be live and in person in Brooklyn at Project PARLOR. It's an event in conjunction with Sublation Media, where you can read my last article that goes more in depth on the last month's video essay, Welcome to the Terror Dome. Also, Ben Burgess has a new piece, and Slavoj Žižek has a new piece in Sublation as well that has all the people talking. Ben Burgess is going to be there June 26th, as well as the homie Norm Finkelstein and Margaret Kimberly of Black Agenda Report. It's free, people, so there is no excuse for y'all not to show up. Pascal and I also were guests recently on the hit podcast, Pod Damn America, where we kind of give you a preview of what tomorrow's show is going to be about. Remember, the second week of every month is a video essay, but this is going to be the last one I'm doing for some time. This one wiped me out. Also, for those heavy music fans out there, I did an interview about music, actually. My main life, well, it was my main life at one point in time, for I Thought I Heard a Sound blog. And I will put links, if not me, then everyone's favorite moderator in Toussaint will have links up to the Pod Damn America show, as well as the I Thought I Heard a Sound blog interview. And don't forget, tomorrow, at 6 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. Central time, 9 p.m. Eastern time, we will be premiering the latest video essay, same as it ever was, From Black Power to Blaxploitation. And after that, right after that, we'll be doing the recap show. And since this is the last video essay that I'll be doing for the foreseeable future, and if call screener extraordinaire in Toussaint is available, I think we're going to make it a call-in show. We might even have a special guest with Pascal and I. Not sure yet. Still waiting to see if that's going to happen. But that being said, let me bring in my homie, my dog. He is the man of the Mau Mau Hour. He is the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings, Jason Miles. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings to the chat. I did that in reverse order. We had a wonderful Friday on Pod Damn America. I very much enjoyed that appearance. I really hope that folk go back and check that out. We had a really great conversation about underclass ideology and a few other things. I also am looking forward to people's reaction to Jason Miles's recent video essay, which he had blessed me with an early advanced viewing of. And I got to tell you, Jason once again has outdone himself in terms of the content. So I'm looking forward to discussing it tomorrow with him as well. Also, tonight's show is going to be a banger, as usual. And I'm glad to be here. And though Jason has justifiably suspended his creation of video essays, that does not mean that we at This is Revolution podcast are going to give up the production of video essays, or that me particularly will not or should not pick up the slack and carry forth with the flame of liberation that Jason has been carrying.
I'm excited. Look, man, we've been talking about this probably soon after we got acquainted with each other and started doing this show, was you contributing. And let's just be honest, if you go into the video essay playlist, the most viewed video essay is The Great Awakening, which is Pascal's essay that he wrote for Black Agenda Report a little over a year ago. So there's a few of the video essays that actually are Pascal's work. So let's not get it twisted that it's just me doing all of it. It's just that there was a time when no one was contributing. In my mind, I thought everyone was going to be contributing, and it didn't happen that way. And then we started going and going and going. And this is one, the last three I've always wanted to do this one, and there's always something that has splintered off. And we did the Cosby one, and then it splintered off. We did the kind of the LA riots one, and now I got to sit down and I got to watch so many of my favorite films that are oh so problematic that I discovered a movie, Pascal, I had never seen or heard of. It's a New York Hood movie from '93 starring MC Lyte.
I'm sure it was rather traumatizing for you.
I'm still trying to figure out what it's about. It was called like what's so fly, or you so fly, or something. Teray had called, and we were talking, and I told him, I was like, look, I got done. I'll try to be brief because we're bringing a guest. I got done doing the principal layout at 3:30 a.m. this morning. And once I got done, because I as I'm getting all these, I'm pulling all this stuff, this movie thing had showed up as something I would want to see. And I clicked it real quick to see if it had any like kind of B-roll footage I could take. And I was like, I'm going to go back and watch this. I'm going to take a break. I'm going to go back and watch this. And I started watching it at 3:30 a.m. and it was the strangest hood movie I've ever seen. It looked like if a bot could make a hood movie. We have to watch it. We have to watch part of it for a trigger warning segment at some point because it triggered me.
That means I would probably hate it.
And I don't know. There's no one in the chat that's mentioning it because I don't think anyone's seen it. It's a hood movie where MC Lyte is one of the main characters.
It's a hood movie, a Klan movie. It is not a Klan movie, though it should be.
It's a hood movie. No, a hood movie is not a Klan movie. But I did watch so many blaxploitation films over the last few weeks, actually. And I did not know there was a movie called The Legend of Nigger Charlie.
That is correct and pretty triggering.
I was like, who greenlit this one? That was my first thought. Well, let's switch gears into something. I don't even know the word. I don't know if it's less or more cheery. Let's bring in our esteemed guest. Dr. Julie Weber is a professor of politics and government and core faculty in women and gender studies. Her main area is political theory, feminist theory, LGBTQI, modern, contemporary, and American political theory. Her work ranges from school violence to comedy theory and satire in American politics. She wrote the book that I've been reading while doing the research for the video essay. I was also switching back to her book, so you'll have to excuse me if I'm a little scatterbrained, because it's one thing to read 25 academic articles on Black cinema and the importance of Sweet Sweetback's badass song, and then reading Julie's very dense book about Columbine. So please welcome, coming all the way live, Dr. Julie Weber.
Hello.
Welcome, Dr. Weber, to This Is Revolution podcast.
Hello.
So I was talking to Ray Reed a few weeks ago, and I was like, do you know where I can get like a Marxist analysis on school shooters? And there's two people I can always ask questions like that to, maybe three: Adolf, Ray, Cedric Johnson. You can always ask those people those questions, right? And they'll give you an answer. And without even like, there's not even a moment to think. He goes, "Oh, I know a woman. She wrote a book about Columbine. Talk to her for you. Blah 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 blah." And next thing we know, we get it all hooked up. And you sent me the book, and I was I think you sent a note that said, just read the introduction. And I told Pascal, I was like, Pascal, she says just read the introduction, but it's a dense introduction. Pascal called me and goes, oh, you didn't lie. This is a dense introduction. So there's going to be some terminology we're going to ask you to parse out for us. First off, before we even get into the deep questions, can you explain the Control Society?
Oh, yes. That's a really short essay by Guy Deleuze that was published, I don't know, in 1992, I think. And he was originally a Marxist and psychoanalytic thinker in France. But right before he died, he had come up with this idea of the Control Society, which is where we move out of the disciplinary society, which is, if you think of the disciplinary society, you can think of it kind of as the industrial society. I'm hedging there, but there's some differences. But for practical purposes, think of the disciplinary society as the industrial society for the most part, 20th century. We were moving more into this control society where it's less about having, free time and free labor, all the things that, for example, unions and early Marxists fought for to get free time, right? Like weekends and vacation and space after work and your own spaces in civil society. The control society begins to kind of train workers to be flexible, right? That's part of the neoliberal line where you mix work and play, work and leisure. I saw an ad the other day. It was like a joke, I think, for business owners that were trying to attract young people to work for them. And they said, they had a list of things, $14 an hour. You can do selfies all day long at work. Sad, right? Sad. And so it's this kind of thing. And the control society is more about, you have to have kind of passwords for everything. I mean, that's something I think we can all kind of understand, right? Every aspect of your life becomes a little bit more minuscule. And a lot of that happens because we do most of our work online, but it goes along with the way the economy shifts online. And so all of our banking, all of our credit, all these things, if you look at China's social credit, all of these things become these minuscule ways of controlling your behaviors in a different way, rather than being in a large organization where you're controlled, or a factory or a school, and you're controlled through other kinds of norms. Now you're controlled through these kind of micro norms that, devolve around things like your credit score, your normative behavior, how you act, how you conduct yourself. So that's the control society. Does that?
Thank you for I was very close to trying to hit you up with some of the questions I had while I highlighted a lot of the book. I was like, should I mess with her? I was like, no, I'll leave her be.
One of the things that I really appreciated about your book, and particularly from the introduction, is how you talk about what in a Marxist terms is kind of what's called superstructure, and how much the assumptions that we have about superstructure, family life, education, institutions outside of the base economy, and how there's never enough discussion about how those things can lead to the phenomenon that we're talking about that basically become, these shootings. But one of the things that I found particularly fascinating is how you discuss corporatism and corporations, and how the infrastructural, internal way in which corporations and corporate structure invade every aspect of our society is something that is not really analyzed effectively in terms of how the reduction to regimen affect and can be possibly proliferating these phenomena. Can you talk about that for us?
Oh, it's everywhere. And I mean, I experienced it all day today at the airport. And I think about it while I'm experiencing it. I mean, even at the airport where, you can tell that for example, flight attendants have been trained to act in a certain way, and it's all been decided by a certain corporate line, right? But it's not human, right? And so my flight was, for example, the plane broke down, and they were handing out these cards, and I asked, so you have to call and reschedule your flight. And I said, well, can I just go to the desk and reschedule it? And they said, no, you have to schedule it through, you have to go online and do it or call this number. And I said, well, why can't I just go to the desk and do it? And she just looked at me blankly, right? It's to the point where, and I'm not in any way casting aspersions on this individual person, but I'm saying that this is a symptom of the way that people are trained. And also right now, while we're having kind of a crisis of capitalism with this inflation and coming out of the pandemic, and the way that basically our whole air system is really a mess, things aren't running as smoothly, but you don't have workers who can kind of respond in real time. They're not allowed to. They're not trained to.
Is there fear as well? Do you think there's a fear as well?
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think that, there's fear that they'll be sanctioned in some way, right? And that's what I mean by these sort of minuscule behaviors. Everyone's kind of watching everyone else, and there's kind of, I guess I would call quality control, which I'm the daughter of an engineer, by the way, so I knew that term a long time ago. He worked at General Motors, so I sort of felt like I grew up in the means of production, like a perfect example of the means of production. Everybody that was in my neighborhood and around me worked for the auto industry in some way. So there is this quality control aspect that is very normative, in the sense that people are policed about how they can react on the job. I mean, they get literal scripts, right, for what they can say. And teachers get this for sure. I mean, this is where it started. It sort of started in education, where textbook companies give them literal scripts that they have to read and wait for possible responses from students. So, and you see that online when you call customer service, all of these things. So, our kind of, what you're right, what Althusser called the superstructure, or the ISAs, that's how I kind of think of them, as the ideological state apparatuses, are totally different now. And Deleuze would say they're modular, right? They kind of, they're not these separate institutions that have their own rules that people work in and then talk about. They're kind of linked through the economy even more. And one of the reasons for that is because we've reformed everything. This is something that I say in the book. We've reformed every institution to make it over in the interests of profit. So, people talk about why the public schools aren't profitable, which is, stunning, to kind of think about why and how public schools should be profitable in this day and age. I don't know, maybe you have some thoughts on that. But
no, I mean,
I can't imagine how.
I mean, this is, I'm not going to pretend that I was able to read all of your book, because it's very, very, it's very cerebral, but
Yes.
in a good way, because you really engage with some of the theoretical components of social structure that exist in Marxist thought, and apply them to demonstrate how we live in a controlled society that exists in a way purely for the necessity of functioning capitalism.
Yep.
And allowing capitalism to function. And if I'm incorrect, correct me, your basic thesis is that this is bound to make people sick, or
Yes.
make people react in a way that will be sick, because this is not the way people normally would function. Now, my question is, how do we know that this is not the way that this is not the way that people would normally function? And why do we assume that there's an essential normative way that people socialize that makes the current manifestation unhealthy?
Well, I would add this to that. And I wanted to say this earlier before you asked your question, when we were talking about earlier about how people are afraid to do things. Pascal and Julie, do you guys remember 10 plus years back where there was these cases where a guy was calling up Kentucky Fried Chickens and McDonald's and he was making managers make employees get nude. Do you remember that? He would call and say that he was a cop on the phone and the district manager was on the phone. He'd find out who the district manager was. He said, I'm here with your district manager, one of your employees. And he'd just make up anything. You have a young lady working there? And he's like, yeah, we have a young lady working here. Which one? He's like, the one with the long hair. Oh, you mean Sally? Yes, Sally stole a purse. And it got the one that actually got the guy caught was he kept going with it so far that he had the manager, who was a female, call her boyfriend to come over to strip search the young lady. She walked out of the room, gave the man the phone. The person on the other end of the phone then had the guy rape the young lady, all because they were looking for a wallet. This is a true story. I'm not making this up. Look it up if you think I'm lying.
No, I believe it.
And the sad part was why. So the victim and the manager both sued. I can't remember if it was McDonald's or Kentucky Fried Chicken. I can't remember which company it was. It was a major company, because they knew about it and they didn't tell their employees about it. They tried to keep it quiet. They made a film about it called Compliance. You can watch it. It's it actually goes.
That is a great term. Yes.
But that was what it was. It was only one employee refused to strip search, do a full body cavity search to his coworker, and it wasn't until I think the guy had asked the woman to get rid of the clothes did she finally realize, I don't think I'm talking to an officer here.
Well, you don't use the term compliance, but you kind of talk about how the necessity for compliance, particularly in education, is part of the things that is not properly discussed in terms of its correlation to these rape shootings. But one of the things that I like about your introduction particularly is that you talk about all of the assumptions that are incorrectly made about what causes these shootings. Can you go into that?
Sure. The book before this one that we're talking about was my dissertation. And in that book, it's called Failure to Hold: The Politics of School Violence. I sort of went through, there was an earlier generation of shootings in the 90s,
yes,
right, that made up the Columbine. And I watched the media for years. And I watched every second of Columbine. And I will tell you that I know who made their careers off Columbine. Journalists, because I saw them every day. One was Soledad O'Brien.
Ooh.
She did. She was featured every day. And I'm glad to see she's kind of done some good things since then. But anyway, so all of these kind of narratives come up then, and you can see. I think Clinton was president at the time for most of this. And they were just really kind of ineffective at, and I say this in the book, the second book, really kind of ineffective at responding to what was causing these shootings, because people were like looking to the president, they were looking to the government, and they were saying, you got to figure this out, right? And they were holding these White House weekends, where they would have the big ones were violent film. They'd have a meeting with Hollywood executives. Nothing would be done. Then they'd talk about guns, but they never really talked about guns because the NRA was already so strong at that point. They talked about prior to that, Tipper Gore, they talked about music and lyrics, right? Those are some of the really early ones.
Well, Marilyn Manson and Rammstein were supposed to be the problems, and the kids weren't even Marilyn Manson fans.
Right, exactly. And the funny thing is, I have some funny stories about this too.
Please.
I think there was a great example of these kids, and I think it's something that they do a trope on in The Heathers. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Heathers.
Yes, too many times.
And you know how those two football players shoot each other?
Yes. I love my dead gay son.
Yeah, that. So that I think, I may be wrong, someone could correct me, but I think that is a trope off of something that really happened, where these two guys were listening to these heavy metal lyrics, and I don't remember which band it was, but
Judas Priest.
Was it? Okay, that one.
Yep.
And they interpreted them incorrectly. So, or they, they had the lines wrong. So you know how people will be singing and they'll sing the lines wrong, and you'll say,
Oh,
"Oh my
Julie, I
God,"
do.
right?
I
I
ruined
can
some
give you a
songs.
good story about me, but I probably shouldn't humiliate myself.
You get along well with Jason. He's told a bit too much about himself recently.
Yeah, I've ruined some songs, Julie. I've ruined every good black funk song that you can imagine with misheard
Well,
silhouette.
but I love this idea that people just make up their own meanings, right? And that's kind of what we should have more of anyway. I mean, people making their own community, people making their own, you know what I mean? Not being led by corporate structures. People are becoming very antisocial and really unable to kind of do these normal human things on their own, I think. Make friends, make meaning. Make meaning is what I would say, right? Is the first step to making community. And humans are meaning makers. And as long as corporations are making meaning for everyone, it's kind of problematic. But so that one, they got the lyrics wrong. But my story is that I can't remember the name of the band. Panama was around
Van
the
Halen.
time.
About to
1984.
Panama. Dun, dun,
Yes.
dun.
Dun, dun, Panama.
I
Yes.
was about 12, and I was sure that it was padded bra.
Oh,
Because that's
definitely
what I was thinking about.
you and Jason are kindred spirits in that one. Wow, you got padded bra from Panama. That was Van Halen, wasn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the David Lee Roth years. That is from the
I love the
1984
David
album.
Lee
Diamond
Roth
Down,
era of
1984.
Van Halen.
Mm-hmm.
That was
Yeah.
like 86 to like 89.
It was
Yep.
84 that
Even
album
earlier.
came out.
Dancing around in my bathing suit, singing padded bra. My
You thought
friends
That's
had
one
their
of my
pants
favorite
on.
Van Halen solos.
going around singing padded.
That scene in Heather's my favorite part, and that kind of that it's so funny you mentioned Heather's in reading your book.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like people were looking for the wrong thing, right? You're constantly asking the wrong question. And if you remember
Right.
that scene in Heather's where the cop goes, "They were gay," and the guy goes, "Well, how do you know?" He doesn't even look at the note. He grabs a bottle of Perrier water and he goes, and they're like, "Oh."
Well, this is how I think about how a lot of these shootings are investigated, really. I mean, to some degree, not all of them, right? But and the way the media kind of spins it, and how there's so many mistakes that get made, and it becomes kind of a rumor mill, initially. So, for example, with the unfortunate, Uvalde shootings that happened 2 weeks ago, I have not really looked at any of the coverage because I've learned that I will wait 2 to 3 weeks until all the stories get checked out. And I won't count on anything to be correct until, you know what I mean? I give it 2 or 3 weeks at least before I start looking at it.
Well, what does that say also too about where we are as an information society, quote unquote, when after 9/11 there were fake stories about people that said they lost individuals and raised money, had books written about them, and it was all lies.
I mean,
And
there's currency in misinformation.
I mean, still to this day, it's almost like no one wants to double check anything because I have to hurry up and get my story out because we're in a society where, you have to beat the Twitter,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which feels almost impossible. So
Well,
what do we even really know about what happened?
About what?
I said, so what do we even really know about these situations, about what happens?
Right. I mean, one of my other favorite things, and this is like maybe kind of morbid, but I love that there's this kind of sabotage that I guess you'd call them shit posters, right? Do when there's a shooting, and they will put something out on Twitter that's misleading, but they'll do it so that it's in front of politicians. And then the politicians will claim something because they want to be out in front of the story, and it's incorrect. And it's still like there's one that they do over and over again with this like kind of comedian named Sam Hyde. He's been accused of being a alt-right comedian. But they always accuse Sam Hyde of being the shooter. So they'll post it on Twitter. Sam Hyde is the shooter. And then I think there was a congressman from New Mexico, and there was a couple others that immediately just read this, and they just posted this, right? And it was incorrect. So I kind of like those stories where some young people will, purposefully kind of sabotage politicians because they're being kind of narcissistic and they want to get out in front of it, and they just want to claim that they know something.
Someone
You know
had
what I mean?
someone had a deep comment here. This in the Hegelian sense, we're definitely a society deluded into a sense of certainty. I was like, ooh, I really like that comment. That was JB. I really did.
Oh.
Hit me.
That's definitely a JB comment. Shout out to JB.
So here's the thing, though. So your position is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, these shootings they're not about individual failures of frustrated, sick young boys. They're actually about a society who is structured in a pathological way that at its core is not surprisingly producing pathological behavior. Is that correct? Can you elaborate on that for us?
That is correct. It's both and. So it's the society is sick and the society is producing these persons. And I mean, I think it's producing them at all ages at this point, right? I saw a story today that the FBI is concerned that there's going to be a lot more of these kinds of shootings, but also alt-right specific. So, focused on this kind of great replacement theory and, out of Breivik in Norway. And so there is that element to it, right, in some of these shootings. And those I don't include in my analysis. So, for example, I wouldn't include, I did include Breivik, but there was a specific reason for that. But these ones that are directed, that are really driven by hate, that are driven by racism, that are driven by
Christchurch.
Yes.
Buffalo.
I mean, they're tangential to what I look at, sort of, but in most of the cases that I look at, there's not much of that. But I will say it's now. I mean, I would say historically. I mean, if you look at historically, it will become probably that more often, right? So if I write a third book, I don't know if I will. It'll have to be focused on the influence of, these Reddit threads, and you know what I mean, and the sort of far right influence over this narrative, because they're picking this up now as part of it. So, but to get to your question, Pascal, I think it's both and. So they're produced by this society that is sick, but most people kind of, I mean, maybe they're happy. I can't really understand why they are. I'll just say I'm not.
For the people in the back.
What?
You said there might be people that are happy. I don't understand why they are.
Well, I guess, like I told you earlier, I'm 50 now. I remember a time when, so I'm sounding like one of these old people now, but I do remember a time when we had like leisure, we had free time, and you just kind of,
free time is looked down upon, Julie.
You weren't on the grind, all the time. And so that's what I mean by that happiness, and that now schools become a preparation for the grind. And,
yes.
and so with these, shooters that I look at in this book, they're not failed joiners, as Catherine Newman argued, who I talk about in the book.
And that's still the narrative that we're seeing today. Would you agree that it's just failed joiners?
Yeah, because, why wouldn't you want to be a part of this, corporatist orgy? You know what I mean? I mean, in some ways, I guess I'm anticipating the argument about Soma or something, right? But it's a little more complicated than that. But I do think that it's both and I think that they fail, but they fail. They're not failed joiners. They fail and they're humiliated in some way. They get stuck in the modulation between these institutions. So let me give some examples.
Thank you.
Cho at Virginia Tech was put on a psych hold because people thought he was weird. Um, and then what happened? He went on a psych hold. The court put him, there. He was referred to psychiatric services, and then he just fell through the cracks. No one ever contacted him again.
Mm-hmm.
This is the kind of thing that happens in the control society, right? If you've had a negative experience in healthcare, then you know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
You go there, they tell you, one thing is wrong, you get some care for it, but if your insurance won't cover it, they say, fine, just go away.
Go die elsewhere, yeah, or go be
Right?
sick elsewhere, yeah.
And this is sort of the thing that happens all over. And so I think something happened probably to Adam Lanza at elementary school that was very traumatic to him, and that's why he went to that school. And then I'm thinking of the Parkland kid who didn't. He's still alive, but he was also, very troubled. His mother had died. She had died, and he was living with other people, and he was also kind of a weirdo. But there's always these kind of events that precede them deciding that they just don't want to live anymore, right? Because they're sort of humiliated and tarnished. They've become that person, and in front of their whole community, and that wouldn't be such a big deal, I don't think, if people felt like they could leave and start over somewhere else.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. You write your books before the internet is what it is today, and before cell phones are what they are today, especially with Columbine being the main case subject. This is 1999, and there were some big shootings beforehand. Was it Jonesboro before Columbine?
Springfield or Oregon.
And how has our Uber connectivity changed this analysis that you have? Because you write the book, I think the first book, or not the first book, but Beyond Columbine is like 2007 when you wrote that?
No, that's 2017.
Okay, 2017. Okay, I'm sorry.
And what actually happens is that I say in there is that the shootings begin to accelerate in 2007, or is it 2006 or 7, whenever YouTube becomes
2005,
right?
I think you said. Yeah, 2006.
Comes online. And then you see a spike, and they continue from there. So it's really, they start to learn about other shootings, and they learn how to cite other shootings from being online, whereas before they wouldn't have had, any of this information. They're on all these Reddit threads, and there's tons of fans of school shooters. This is the whole other aspect.
Much like there's fans of serial killers, right?
Right. And some of them are kind of ironic in the, in that sense. So like after the Holmes shooting in Colorado, you remember that, the movie, At the Dark Knight, there were people, they called themselves homies. And he liked Slurpees, so they were big on, so it was all this kind of pop culture references around the shootings. And there's a person I know that I'll reference here, Natalie Petone, who's, she's in France. She studies fans. And I used her analysis for a lot of sort of that coverage. So there is a lot of fans, and I think it's probably hard for the authorities to sort out right now, given that story I talked about today, who the fans are versus who the people are who are going to actually go and do something. So it makes it impossible for them to profile. That's one of the other aspects of this.
Well, why is there a morbid fascination with the idea of these serial killers? I watched a documentary. I couldn't even finish it. It was on Ted Bundy. And every time I see anything on Ted Bundy, it's always like he was the most smartest, handsome, debonair. And I'm like, well, isn't the character in Silence of the Lambs based off Ted Bundy? He just walked around with the fake cast and hit women upside the head that were unsuspecting and put them in his car. That is not, he's not a pimp and and convincing them with his Dracula-like mind powers to get into his car. So why do we love this retelling of these people, almost like kind of anti-heroes, it feels like, in the retelling of their stories?
Oh, that's a good line of inquiry. And I think that as a society, we're obsessed with anti-heroes. And I teach a class where we do anti-heroes. And I think these are a little bit different from anti-heroes because they're actually like, they're sort of like anti-heroes in the sense that they embrace their loserdom, right? That would be the thing about an anti-hero, I guess. But also, we have other ones like Walter White, right? People who start out good and turn bad. And people see it as, that the system is so corrupt that these people are showing them how they can game the system. And they feel like that's the only place they can see hope, you know what I mean? Or a light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe I can game the system. Some version of, this is our new hero, right? The person who figures out how to game the system and win anyway. So yeah, I would say yes, edgelords. That's true. I see that comment. That's true. True.
Well, it's in the work. I finally finished a long form video essay that I've been working on for a few weeks. And that was kind of one of the things that I discovered in why people would want to valorize drug using, drug dealing pimps as some sort of hero or positive imagery. You want to say something, Pascal?
Yeah, I wanted to ask some of the questions that stem around the way in which school shooters are racially and gender essentialized, and how there are this kind of pop psychological attempt to say, well, those white men, those young white males, can't have a gun around them; they'll just pop off. This consistent discourse and rhetoric around how this violence is endemic to white maleness of a certain age and generation, and how it's indicative of a certain kind of essentialized pathology among that particular demographic. What are your thoughts on that kind of discourse? Two, do you see it being leveraged even in reputable places like in academia? And three, what are the effective ways to really rebut those types of pathologizations?
Oh, well, you're into, yeah, I've thought about writing an op-ed, but I'm not, as you can tell, I'm a dense writer. So that would be a challenge for me. Maybe I could get some help. But no, I don't like the toxic masculinity thing at all. I think there are toxically masculine persons. I just don't think they're these shooters, and I don't think it's something that can just be applied to every analysis where a man, whatever his race, is bad. I think it needs to be thought through. And so, especially in the case of these shooters, I don't think so, because they're actually picked on by what I would call toxic masculinity.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, because I read an article before we did the show that said 80% of all these shooters committed some sort of violent act against women. Ergo, men that are violent towards women will be a school shooter. I didn't really go along with the rationale, but
no, I don't either. And I'll tell you why. If we're talking about these school shooters that I'm looking at, I wouldn't say that about the I can't remember his name, but the guy in California, the son of the director.
Oh, the guy in Santa Barbara?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that about him. He's got issues. But he wrote them out, right? It's very clear. And there could be a couple others like that guy that went into the yoga studio.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Also, so you've got to actually analyze this. There's no one size fits all, kind of analysis that works for this. And so some of these guys, I would say, are mostly picked on by toxic masculinity. If you look at the analysis I do on Columbine, The toxic masculinity is the football players at Columbine High School and the deep Christians, right? Ralph Larkin did this great analysis. He's a sociologist, and I used it heavily in the book. He went there and studied it. I've been to Columbine too, so that's how I say some things about the building and, you know, claims that people make about how effective that shooting was. But in terms of toxic masculinity, no. And then I'm going to say something. I haven't written this out yet, but I'm thinking about it, you know, an op-ed, because I tend to think that this is just my opinion, that it's not family annihilation or you know, which is what people call it. When a person, you know, a man commits suicide who maybe is a DV person, right, or someone who's being left by his wife, who's male identified, maybe, right, and says, if you know, if I can't have you, nobody can have you, and we're all gonna go together, right, which is a really sad situation, and it does happen. But in these cases of these shootings, yes, technically they do attempt to or do shoot women and kill them. But these are their primary caretakers. These are the people that love them the most. These are the people that agonize over their existence, that help them. I think of Adam Lanza, for example. He lived with his mother, and he was estranged from his father and his brother. And I tend to see these as mercy killings, honestly, that they know they're going to go and do this. I'm not saying it's right? I don't agree with anything any of these shooters do personally, okay? But I do have to, in order to kind of make sense of them, I have to kind of get into the logic of it. And he shot his mother before he went to Sandy Hook. And I honestly think it's because he didn't want her to have to live with the shame. That's sort of my reading of it, is that it's more mercy in some of these cases. Not all of these cases, but they have to be read, right, in a certain way. And he left his brother's ID at the scene. So there was animosity towards his brother. I don't know if you remember this at Sandy Hook, but they went to New York and arrested his brother and took him into custody because they thought he did the shooting. So, and he was alienated from his father and his brother. So, and his father later said that, this is in the book, that there were 4 bullets when he shot his mother, 1 for every member of the family. So in a way, it was a family annihilation, but I do think that in some ways, one way they could be interpreted, I'm not saying this is what they are, but is as mercy. So it's not always about a hatred of women, and it's about a person that is really messed up, right? It's the same with family annihilation, but I don't think these one-size-fits-all toxic masculinity kind of analysis are going to be convincing to people who've already been, you know, traumatized by toxic masculinity themselves. They're probably more likely to respond to something a little more gender neutral and humane. Now to the race issue, and if you look at, it's not true that they're all white. That's not true. It's just factually incorrect. I mean, a lot of them are, but there's, in Red Lake is the first one after the hiatus from Columbine, is on a Native American reservation by a Native American shooter. And Virginia Tech, Parkland. He was adopted. And then I also look at Hassan Nadal, who was he was a psychologist or psychiatrist at a military base. You remember that one?
I remember that one.
He was, I don't remember, I think his country of origin was Canada, but he was Muslim, and he had real ethical issues with a lot of his patients. He felt bad for them, sending them back out into the field, into war, after they had they had admitted that they maybe committed war crimes or they maybe hurt someone and they couldn't live with it. And he was really tore up about it. And his superior officers were just like, well, you just have to do it. You just have to send them back, and you have to go too. And that was when he kind of, yes, Nidal Hassan. And that was when he went. He lived, but he was targeting other soldiers. He wasn't targeting civilians in that shooting. And the Pulse nightclub shooter. The Pulse nightclub shooter, this is an interesting one. I don't know if the media ever really backtracked and made good on this, but they made a big deal about that shooter picking the Pulse nightclub because it was a gay club. That's not the case. According to court documents, his wife said he picked it out of a phone book.
Whoa.
Wow.
Whoa. So it also feels like because I don't want to say the questions we're asking, but back to your original point about a lot of these guys doing the Heather's version of research, it's like shot up a gay nightclub, must have hated the gays.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get so much of this wrong, man. It's like everything is wrong about this stuff.
Yes.
Well, I read an article on the what is the gentleman's name, the young man's name that was killed in Wyoming, Matthew
Shepard.
Matthew Shepard,
Mm-hmm.
and that killing being drug related.
I could.
And he knew those people. It wasn't a random thing at all. Like they had relationships with each other. That was about drugs. It wasn't about homophobia. They were all gay.
Right. I mean, I hadn't heard that, but I could totally see that. I mean, that makes sense. That's an interpretation that makes sense. And if that's, you know what I mean? Yeah. If there's evidence for that, then yeah. I mean, we don't, and the media goes kind of nuts, and people go nuts, and they speak to eyewitnesses, which are not always reliable. There's a problem with having, being on media, being equated to celebrity. I think it's part of what fuels this. So like I said, I wait a month at least until I start looking at it. And I read a number of sources off of each other. And I still don't know that I always get it completely right.
You made a statement in your book where you talk about, like, who's going to tell the FBI that you bullied the biggest school shooters in history? Exactly. So when they come back and ask questions like, nope, we never, nope, we didn't know those guys. Yep.
I mean, it makes like would any of those folks at Columbine have said, oh, I did it? Yeah. I mean, one guy was stupid and said that. But that was interesting. But he was a football player. But
well, Dr. Weber, as a someone who I feel confident saying is on the left, a dialectical materialist, who is probably well aware of the perennially annoying, crappy takes of liberals. How exactly do we confront those of us who use dialectical and historical materialism to try to come to the conclusions about why these phenomena are happening outside of this absurd rationales that we see in the liberal media? How do we confront the liberal and conservative attempts to paint these occurrences in ways that, number one, does not serve the aim of stopping them in the long run, and two, doesn't get to the larger systemic problem of how our society is structured being one of the causes that precipitates them?
Mm-hmm. Well, I had a couple talks last week about guns. Everyone wants to talk about guns and how we're going to limit guns. And I tell them, I think the number is now 400 million in circulation in the United States. It's one of the most heavily armed societies in the world. So I think gun control, is a sign that we're taking it seriously as a society, but it's not going to stop anything because those guns are already out there. And people will sell them and there's no way to track them. So my argument is what can we do? You're asking me, not what needs to be done, like who's going to do it, right? Because liberals aren't going to do it. I guess, confronting, I mean, for my part, I don't know. There's so many factors. I mean, you've stumped me. I could say that, we need more community. We need to build community at the local level. We need to vote at the local level. We need to stop paying attention to these celebrities for sure, and stop paying attention to these politician celebrities. I mean, if Nancy Pelosi texts me one more time, all of a sudden she's upset that the Republicans are going to win the midterms. Well, who knew, right? So just kind of like, so a little late, right? So I think that building community at the local level is a really important thing. Reminding older people and teaching younger people what community looks like, because I think that young people don't get much of an opportunity for it. I can say this for sure from my kids, right? I have twin 12-year-olds. We did go through the pandemic, and that was rough too. But I also think that, knowing that friendship and trusting people, your neighbors, people in the community, doing things to help people, relying on each other is more important than the grind. Fighting the grind, I think, is the front line of most of this. I don't know what to do about the alt-right and the far right, but I'm not sure that it's as big of a problem as many people think it is. I mean, it might be, but it just depends. Was that a terrible answer? I'm sorry. I don't know.
No, not at all. It was honest. That's why would we want anything else with that?
I think if we do that, then we'll see more possibilities.
Well, there's a nice super chat here by Razorleaf. Thank you for the super chat, Razorleaf. Maybe the libs focus on gun control because they don't want to take on the material roots of mass shootings.
Right. Yep. And they're going to lose anyway because they don't have any control over the Senate. So
it almost feels like it's just a fundraising mechanism.
Yep.
Especially because people go so wild over the idea of freedom. I had to watch way too much Ronald Reagan. I was looking for a specific thing he was saying, so I had to watch all these old interviews when he was out of office, actually in the mid 70s. And he just was so big on the idea of losing freedom and the failure of government. And that kind of becomes to me the conversation that you see having when gun control legislation comes up like it is where we are now. One last question I have for you as we are coming to an end. There's always statistics after these shootings come out about mass shootings and what constitutes a mass shooting, where this mass shooting's happening, and it'll be some meme or hot take now, 0 days since last mass shooting, and then someone will then try to combat that by saying, aha, but these shootings you said were mass shootings were in inner city neighborhoods, and they were just colored people shooting each other, so that's different, and that shouldn't count.
Wait, what's the question again?
So, and you've seen this before, right, Pascal?
Whether or not something is defined as a mass shooting, depending on the race of the perpetrator.
Where
right.
it is, yeah.
Well, the subway shooting was definitely an attempt, right? There were bombs. It was very much like Columbine in New York, right?
Oh no, you're not talking about the guy from the 90s.
No, I'm talking about like 2 months ago, in New York, who set off the bombs. But he was I hesitate to say brilliant because it's terrible. But he was showing them that all their cameras in the subway were worthless, and they're just sort of like these pro forma forms of security. I forget his name, but then he walked around New York for like 2 days and they never found him, and he was right there in the neighborhood. And he was a black man. He was like 50, I think. But it was on the subway, and it was like the busy part of the subway, so it wasn't like.
I vaguely remember that.
But I mean, he sort of was kind of showing the ineffectiveness of all the things that we have, at least his example was. But I think people will do that. They'll do that, and I think they'll say that. I think it's perfectly legitimate that it would happen. Do you see
Well,
what you know what I mean?
Yeah. You know,
I
it's just
definitely could see it happening in
there's just this
Chicago.
weird there's just this weird thing that every time there's any sort of talk about gun control legislation and shooters and what could be the problem, and then we start looking at material failures of capitalist society, and then all of a sudden the conversation then goes, well, there's not that many shootings because these other shootings happened in the inner city, and these are criminally motivated shootings, ergo they don't count the same way, and I didn't know there was a metric.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I'm thinking of Chicago.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
usually they point to Chicago and say,
yeah.
look at
I
these
mean,
shootings that happen in Chicago. Why isn't the news talking about them?
mm-hmm. But I mean, I think it's possible for them to happen in a mass shooting, like I'm
Yeah.
talking about. Absolutely. I mean, it happens. It happens in Brazil. It happens in Norway. It happens in, you know what I mean? It's not
Mhm.
just. I talk about them in the book. They're global, right? I just wonder if there's been one that we haven't known about because it hasn't hit the media.
Yep.
It could be. I mean, I remember when John Benet Ramsey, if you remember John Benet Ramsey, um, uh, there was this case at the same time, which was Girl X. They called her Girl X because they didn't give her name. She was in Chicago, and she was a little African American girl who disappeared in the same way. But the media never covered her, and it was at exactly the same time. But most of the coverage was of John Benet Ramsey because the media kind of wants to talk about this, right, as that kind of problem. So, but I think it's entirely possible. And Mark Seltzer has a great book on serial killers in Detroit, um, if you are interested. But sorry. But Detroit was such a post-industrial. I mean, I remember growing up around. It looked like the Soviet Union. Like things were falling down, and right. And there were all of these, sort of just like dilapidated, and it's because the GM moved out of the city, and the sports teams moved out of the city. People abandoned the city, white flight, and also middle class black flight. Like people left the city, right?
Mhm.
But this left all of these spaces in the city unowned, which is a really nice concept that I like that people use when they talk about bullying in schools too. Unowned spaces, and serial killers were really successful in Detroit because there was just nobody there. There was no community. There was nobody there watching. So anybody that was there, mostly prostitutes, sex workers, ended up being targets of. And that's why I call these the dark spaces of our enlightened capitalist control
Yeah,
society.
there's actually a documentary about a serial killer that killed some disgusting amount of women, but the majority of them, if not all, were drug addicted, street walking sex workers.
Mm-hmm.
And there were witnesses that just didn't even tell the police. They're like, nah, he's not doing anything wrong.
Yep.
It was I can't think of the name of it. And I want to say it was in Cleveland area.
Probably. I mean, do
Somewhere.
these correspond to a level of industrial production or economic decline? I mean, they're directly related. So it's directly related.
Well, on that note, it is time for us to go to the Patreon bonus champagne room. So, if you guys are patron members, we will be there shortly in the champagne room to take your calls. Yes, it is a call-in show. So, if you guys have any comments or questions, I'm sure I feel like this topic is something that people definitely want to call in and say something about. Please do it. Also, we won't be doing a champagne room on Thursday since we're doing the video essay and recap show on Wednesday. So this is going to be the last time we will be doing the champagne room for the week. So on that note, Julie, thank you so much for taking time to join us today.
Thank you for having
Get
me.
ready for a fun, spicy time in the champagne room.
I
And
am.
we are out.